Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Hello world, you're listening to STRATEGIKON, your window to all things security and foreign affairs.
The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammad bin Salman, is incredibly young for someone with so much responsibility. He's also Defence Minister and in charge of the economy. He's got that because he's spent the last few years being effectively tutored by his father, the king. He has emerged from the shadows with a meteoric rise to take over one portfolio after another. Saturday, the 4th of November, has been termed already the Night of the Long Knives because, under the orders of the Crown Prince, a large number of senior Saudi princes, ministers, former ministers and business figures have all been rounded up, their assets seized, they've been put into luxury detention. This is unprecedented in Saudi Arabia. These are big public figures and they've been publicly humiliated and accused, so officials say, of corruption and abuse of power. This is also being seen as a power grab by the Crown Prince. He is now consolidating all the reins of power into his hand.
For years, the international community bemoaned the fact that the Saudi establishment was a Byzantine collection of powerful interest groups, each marching to its own beat. That what passed for national security was essentially tribal and clan security. This made it a particularly difficult entity to deal with for outside powers, especially Western ones, who only had at best a passing interest in developing the sophisticated knowledge of the Saudi system and its key players. Yes, Saudi Arabia had a king, but the king's rule was predicated on the fact that he had a consensus of these powerful interest groups upon which his rule rested. He did not dictate to them, they organized their agendas around him. He was, in effect, the representative of the collective. This was just one of the multiple problems Saudi Arabia had. Its monarchs were all very old and long-lived. When current King Salman took over from former ruler King Abdullah, he was 79 years old, making him one of the youngest in the line of succession. But importantly for the kingdom and its peculiar political form, King Salman had behind him his son, Crown Prince and next in line to the throne, Mohammad bin Salman, or MBS. MBS is young, very young at the tender age of 32. Since his father's ascension to the Saudi throne in 2015, MBS had been hard at work putting together a suite of domestic and international reforms designed to make the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia far more resilient to internal and external pressures. Among the internal pressures is the very real threat posed to the monarchy from the unrealized expectations of young Saudis who, while respectful and fearful of the monarchy's conservative Wahhabist rule, desired change and modernity. Envious of the rapid pace of developments among the smaller Gulf states, especially the United Arab Emirates, owing much to their relative liberalism in comparison to Saudi Arabia, these small countries were far more adept at creating domestic and international environments conducive to Western interests and largely disinterested populations, disinterested in the potential for rebellion. The Saudis simply traded on the fact that it was the world's premier oil producer, and this fact bought it a seat at the table of the international community. With regard to the Middle East, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's importance revolved around the country being the custodian to Islam's two most holy and revered sites, Mecca and Medina, cities important to both Sunnis and Shiites. So long as oil was plentiful and prices reasonably high, monies could be invested in the Saudi national security establishment. Repression could be easily excused as the only effective way to rule. Monies could also be used to buy off troublesome members of the excessively large Saudi royal family and rebellious citizens. Now, a number of things have conspired against the old way of political business in Saudi Arabia. The world is making moves to step away from oil and is creating greener methods of power. This has deflated the price of oil. Not even the wars in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, or the economic and diplomatic blockade of fellow Gulf Cooperation Council member Qatar has excited international markets in the black gold. What is making a major impact is the realization by MBS that the monarchy and the Saudi state cannot survive if left to the old ways. With his father's permission, MBS has started rolling out his reform program. It is so ambitious that it has surprised many in the international community. Critics have argued that many of his plans are unrealizable, but this hasn't stopped MBS. He has given Saudi women permission to drive. He has declared his intention of moving away from conservative Wahhabism and toward a more liberal form of Islam. Both of these reforms are near revolutionary for a state known for its sclerotic and oppressive rule. Internationally too, Riyadh is moving into uncharted waters. In 2015, political instability in neighboring impoverished Yemen prompted Saudi military intervention. At first, it was about removing Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh. But the fragility of Yemen saw a highly contracted mission creep. Before too long, it was all about fighting Houthi rebels that had been accused by Riyadh of colluding with Iran because of their shared Shia beliefs. The war in Yemen evolved from a secular political conflict into a conflict with sectarian undertones to now a fully religious struggle, seen as pitting Saudi proxies in Yemen against Iran's Houthi proxies. How much of this war had to do with deliberate Saudi mischief or local conditions on the ground in Yemen is not entirely clear. What is clear is that the Saudi war machine has torn its way through Yemen, creating more poverty and chaos in a country already known for poverty and chaos. But in Riyadh, the war is all about Iranian interference and it's all about religion, two things that call for a zero-sum outcome. Layer on top of that the active presence of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, where US drone strikes are attempting to break up this group's fighting capacity, Yemen is becoming an intractable mess. And Houthi rebels that may or may not have been taking orders from Tehran prior to the Saudi military intervention are now clearly taking orders, weapons, training and advice from Tehran. The war in Yemen has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Similarly in Qatar, while the historic relationship between the House of Saud and Qatari House Al Thani has been generally cordial, there have been times of high tension between the two. In 1995, a coup against the sitting King Khalifa bin Hamad by his son Hamad bin Khalifa saw a change in the way Qatar was being run. No longer content to let Saudi Arabia dictate to Qatar, Hamad bin Khalifa wanted to see his country evolve its sovereignty to a point where it could make up its own decisions. This was a bold move for a country of only 2 million people. Part of the new Qatari policy was the creation of the Al Jazeera news network that quickly began criticizing fellow GCC members' domestic and foreign policies. Clever and patient diplomacy generally overcame differences of opinion within the GCC regarding the utility of Al Jazeera and de-escalated other tensions. But Al Jazeera's allegedly partisan reporting during the outbreak of the 2011 Arab Spring was seen as a national security concern to all Gulf states apart from Qatar. The discovery of the world's largest gas fields within Qatari territory greatly added to Doha's wealth and that of the Al Thani family. This encouraged even more ambition on behalf of the Qataris, eager to play a larger role in regional and world affairs. Doha began injecting itself as a broker between groups that were no longer in favor regionally or internationally. Among them was the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and the Taliban. The Muslim Brotherhood's electoral win in Egypt in 2012 and its disastrous short time in power destabilized the largest Arab state. Established interests in Cairo have never forgiven Doha for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood government. However, it wasn't until mid-2017 that tensions between the plucky and independent Qatar finally crossed the Rubicon in its relations with the GCC. Led by Riyadh, the Saudis orchestrated an economic and diplomatic blockade against Qatar in an attempt to bring Doha and the Al Thani family to heel. The blockade had the opposite effect. Instead of acquiescing to Saudi demands, Qatari King Tamim bin Hamad accelerated his breach with the GCC, inviting the Turkish military to set up a base in Qatar and to reach out to Saudi Arabia's and, by extension, the GCC's mortal enemy, Iran, in order to break the economic sanctions imposed against it. Then there was the recent resignation of Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri in Riyadh a fortnight ago. Hariri was known for wanting to reach out across the sectarian divide in the functionally dysfunctional state of Lebanon. The country is famously riven by sectarian divisions between the four main groups, the Shia, led by Hezbollah, the Christians, the Sunnis, and the Druze. The problem for MBS is that, having taken Hariri out, he and his advisors will have to work hard to find a suitably legitimate and strong Sunni Lebanese candidate for Prime Minister to thwart the entrenched interests of Iranian-supported southern Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah, arguably the most organized and powerful force in Lebanon. For MBS, rolling back Hezbollah in Lebanon would be a major blow both to that organization and to its sponsor, Iran. To discuss these matters, today we are happy to have back on Strategikon Dr. Imad Harb. Dr. Harb is a member of the SAGE International Australia Advisory Board, as well as Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Imad.
Thank you for having me.
Imad, will start off by asking a question posed by SIA intern Ms. Astrid Wikström, who is based in the UK studying at the University of Bath. Astrid asks, what factors are influencing Crown Prince Mohammad bin Salman's desire to implement his social changes, especially with regard to women's mobility? Are they as progressive as liberal commentators would have them?
Wow, this is a very, very good question, and it is a very inclusive and comprehensive question. The answer to it is rather comprehensive, and it would include a lot of the issues that Saudi Arabia is confronted with, a lot of the issues that Crown Prince Mohammad bin Salman is trying to address. But generally speaking, the first issue is we're talking about a member of the royal family who has basically risen up from obscurity. He was nowhere 3 years ago. And he came up when his father took over the reins of power in January of 2015. So he definitely had to establish a name for himself. Obviously, his father helped him by giving him the portfolio for the defense, for the Ministry of Defense. But yet he had to really establish a certain number of programs, whether they are economic, military, or political. And he has been very, very busy trying to do these things. Many issues that this is what makes all his attempts appear to be maybe a little bit too much, too fast, too soon. And that is going to definitely be judged by how well he accomplishes what he wants to do. But politically speaking, he has basically consolidated his power. There are no, as far as we can tell now, there are no challengers, so to speak, within the royal family. The Saudi state is no longer the third Saudi state. Now it is the fourth Saudi state, because this is the re-establishment of the state under one line. Basically, Mohammed bin Salman's grandfather was the one who established the modern state, and his sons took over power from each other. Now it's only one of those sons who is bequeathing it to his son, and Mohammed bin Salman is in there for who knows how long. He could be king for half a century. So he has a lot to do. He has a lot of time to accomplish it, obviously. But the challenges are definitely very, very daunting. The challenges are very numerous. And he really has to be careful about how he goes about doing this. What he has done now over the last, 3-4 months since he became crown prince, what he has done is, in a way, phenomenal, but yet in another way, extremely dangerous. He doesn't have to go this fast, because when you do things this serious, and with this speed, it's likely that things are not going to work out the way you want them to work out. And credibility in government is very, very important, and for him and the whole Saudi royal line, it's very, very important that he succeeds. If he does not succeed, he will be judged by 70% of the Saudi population. What I mean is 70% of the Saudi population, these are the people who are under 30. So he has to really perform. He has to really deliver. Otherwise, he will definitely fail, and fail miserably, because 70% of the population will think, who are now, by the way, rooting for him, will think that he is no good, and he has failed them, basically. So whether it is economics, politics, military, the military adventure in Yemen is really a very bad one. He should soon sue for peace. Economically, the country is not doing very well. Saudi Arabia is being thought of, this huge kingdom, great kingdom that has huge mineral reserves, and yet it doesn't look like they're doing very well economically, with low oil prices, and the population wants different things. The social contract is in danger, the old social contract between the ruler and the ruled. All of these things are very, very important, and all of them are essential for Mohammed bin Salman's success. So far, it's definitely a mixed bag. And so far, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's more doubtful than it is successful. It depends on how the next couple of years come out. But so far, things are, you cannot basically judge how things are going to be.
But ultimately, you think that Mohammed bin Salman's plans come from a sincere place. He sincerely wants to see change or implement change in the Saudi state.
He does want to implement change, if for no other reason than success. He wants to implement change because the Saudi population, young as it is asking for change. The problem is, it depends on how you deal with change. If you deal with change too abruptly, if you deal with change with a lot of pain, if you deal with change by imprisoning a whole lot of people, that's not change. That's basically re-establishing authoritarianism in a different format, under a different king or under a different ruler. He may want to modernize Saudi Arabia in the religious sense. For instance, he's given women rights they never dreamed of getting, the right to drive, the right to attend football games and all that stuff. Yet these are, monumental as they are not the defining moment for Saudi Arabia. In other words, the defining moment for Saudi Arabia is openness. It's opening this social system. It's opening the religious system on totally different ideas from what Saudi Arabia has known for the last, 85 years. So this is why, yes, he is a social reformer, maybe, but yet at the same time, at what price? If he wants to reform socially, he has to also reform politically, because you cannot do one without the other. And this is what the young people are going to be looking for. It's not enough for a woman to just simply be able to drive. It's also enough for her to be elected, to be openly out there trying to do the same thing that men are trying to do. And I wonder if he's going to be able to deliver that.
It's interesting to see how things are developing, but from my perspective, and as you rightly point out, in the process of reform, Mohammed bin Salman has made a lot of enemies. I mean, among the enemies are the old guard that kept the old system in check, namely the Wahhabist clerics. Now, with these guys having somehow created a version of Saudi Arabia supporting terrorism internationally, how do you think the kind of reform program moving forward will likely affect the more conservative elements of the Wahhabist clerics and the ability for Saudi Arabia, or the elements of the old guard that had whether directly or indirectly, either sympathized or supported Salafist terrorism internationally. Is this going to have an effect on that problem?
You know, the old religious establishment has been entrenched, obviously. But if you have been following Saudi Arabian news over the last probably year or 2 years even, there have been, according to reports, thousands of mosque officials or mosque imams that have been sidelined. They have been sent home. They have been cashiered, so to speak, in preparation for what Mohammad bin Salman said he wants to do with society. He wants to return Saudi Arabia to the traditional moderate Islam that it was supposed to have been running on before 1979. 1979, we know that there was this uprising in Mecca, of all places, and people accused, those people who participated in it, accused the Saudi royal family of not being good enough for Islam, so to speak, well, not being conservative enough. So Saudi Arabia went and became a conservative country, and international conditions helped it, and the economic conditions anyway helped it become a very influential force in the Muslim world. But with him now trying to sideline this established religious authority, he is trying to establish a new religious hierarchy that would be first beholden to him personally, would represent the moderate Islam that he wants to establish, basically the Islam of the state, instead of the Islam of the mosque. In other words, Islam of the mosque as determined by these conservative clerics. So he wants to establish an Islam of the state, and the state that is part of the international system, the state that wants to be accepted in the international system. Thus, it would want a moderate Islam that is not being accused of, fomenting terrorism or anything like that. So he's in for a big fight. He's definitely in for the big fight, because he cannot reform Islam or reform the religious establishment of Saudi Arabia. Islam does not need reforming at any rate. If he wants to reform the religious establishment, he is bound to have to reform the social structure upon which this religious establishment sits. He has to reform the educational system. He has to basically rewrite every single book that students read in schools. He has to reestablish the system of social relations. He has to establish a system of control between the ruler and the ruled. I mean, what kind of state are we expecting here? Are we expecting a state that is open for discussion? Are we expecting a state that's going to respect the freedom of speech or of assembly or writing or expression of all kinds? Or are we going to just expect a state that is, yes, moderate, but yet nobody can speak their mind? So the religious establishment is only one form of this reform. If the religious establishment is sidelined, that is the old conservative one is sidelined, fine. But what replaces it has to also include a moderate form, has to also include a form that accepts change, accepts people's freedom of speech and movement. And this is something that maybe, just maybe, Saudi Arabia politically cannot yet take.
Imad, what do you see lies in store for Lebanon following on from the resignation of former Prime Minister Saad Hariri? Do the Saudis have a plan to elevate someone from within Lebanon's Sunni community to represent their interests? Who might that person be? And can they be effective as a counterbalance to Hezbollah and the Shiite political parties that are aligned with Hezbollah?
This is a big question. It involves a whole bunch of factors. But first, the Saudi Arabians have done a bad thing. In other words, Saudi Arabia has done Saad al-Hariri actually a service by limiting his movement, whatever it is. Nobody really knows exactly specifically what really happened, but he appeared to have been not free to say his mind or to travel or to go here and there. But For one thing, they gave him, by doing this, they gave him a position, they gave him a push, so to speak, within Lebanese society that he can exploit to do different things. The only problem with this is, positive as that is, the only problem with it is, will he be able to sway other political factions within the country, specifically Hezbollah, to come around to his way of thinking? And this is something that's definitely doubtful. Yes, this, his political position has been strengthened. Yes, he has basically gained a lot of popular legitimacy, but the Lebanese state is still a weak state. The Lebanese state upon which he runs is not his state, honestly. I mean, it's the state of everybody, and he is just one cog in the machine. The stronger cog and the bigger cog in the machine is Hezbollah. Whether he can accommodate Hezbollah, which I don't think he can, or not, will really make or break Saad al-Hariri's political future in Lebanon. I mean, I hate to say this, but the future development of Lebanon will depend on whether Hezbollah and Iran decide that maybe it is time to just let Hezbollah be a political party instead of being a militia, a state within the state. And I think they would do a disservice, a big disservice for Lebanon and for all communities of Lebanon if they don't accept the fact that this is a internationally recognized state with boundaries, with institutions, with mechanisms, with a constitution, and they should not be outside the realm of that state. So the final judgment on Lebanon will definitely come who knows when, but it will definitely be a product of balance of force. It will be a product of possibly a good faith negotiation process between the state and Hezbollah, and specifically between Saad al-Hariri and Hezbollah. So the Lebanese president may be able to act as an arbiter, as normally is the position for the Lebanese president anyway. But the problem with the Lebanese president, the current Lebanese president, Michel Aoun, is he is beholden for his position to Hezbollah. I mean, he only became president after Hezbollah supported him. So I wonder if he will be able to really get out, so to speak, a little bit from under the control of Hezbollah. Actually, Hezbollah does not control him, but he has to hew to what Hezbollah is looking for. And so it's a balance of power kind of situation. It depends on who is going to be doing what kind of negotiations. But Saad al-Hariri definitely is in that position for a long time. I don't think that there is anybody else who can take Saad al-Hariri's position, no matter what the Saudis may want. There were rumors about the Saudis supporting a challenge by his own brother, Baha. But yet again, I mean, the Sunnis themselves said, they went in demonstrations and they said, well, nobody is going to dictate who is our leader. Saad al-Hariri is our leader. I mean, his brother basically fell flat on his face. So I don't think the Saudis are going to be able to create a different leadership for the Sunnis in Lebanon.
And now for a musical interlude. You're listening to Strategikon, the podcast of SIA.
سعد صاحبي وأقدره وافخر بطاريه على درب شيبة وأنا ولا خلف مبادئها سفير يعني أنا لا زهمني
And that was Manahel 5 Fog with Saudi Arabia Song. We'll now return to Saudi Winter of Hope, the domestic and regional impacts of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Imad, what lies behind the grand bargain between Israel and Saudi Arabia? Can they form an effective bloc to Iranian strategic moves in the Middle East, or is this just wishful thinking?
It is definitely wishful thinking on the part of the Saudis, definitely on the part of the Israelis. I think the Israelis are, in Arabic, the translation for Arabic is probably the best thing. They are running a way forward. I mean, they create for themselves a little imaginary dream, and and when it doesn't happen, they create another dream based on it, and that doesn't also happen. So the Israelis have been trying to be friends with all the Arabs, and definitely today they probably are trying definitely to be, to normalize with Saudi Arabia and UAE and other Arabs. But this, for them and for the Saudis and the Emiratis, this is running a way forward. You cannot run away and normalize relations without resolving the Palestinian question. Palestine has always been the first, most important cause, so to speak, for the Arabs. Saudi Arabia may normalize, UAE may normalize with Israel, Egypt normalized with Israel, Jordan normalized with Israel. There is nary any Egyptian traveling to Israel today. Nobody goes to Israel. I mean, the popular wisdom, the popular sentiment is with the Palestinians. Give the Palestinians their rights. Give the Palestinians a right to a state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and then do whatever normalization you want to do. I mean, this is specifically what the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative stipulated. I mean, we give the Palestinians an independent state, and then the Arabs will normalize with Israel, and Israel will live normally like everybody else. Israel wants to live normally like everybody else without doing the very important task of giving the Palestinians a national expression, a political expression to their nationalism, which is a state.
Can you see the Russians being able to form a peace deal among the warring parties in Syria? The regime of Bashar al-Assad has most of Syria's major cities back under its control. The Russians are technically supporting the Syrian regime and, by extension, the strategic interests of Iran. If what we are seeing from a big picture perspective is a chess match between Israel and Saudi Arabia on the one hand and Iran and Russia on the other, what is the likelihood of a check leading to a major confrontation or war?
I don't believe that anybody wants a major war in the Middle East. I don't think Russia is interested in a war in the Middle East. It cannot afford it. Neither is Iran interested, nor can Saudi Arabia launch a war in the Middle East. And Israel definitely is not interested in a war, at least not now. I mean, can you imagine what Israel will do if it launched a war in Syria or against Hezbollah in Lebanon in the middle of winter? I mean, what do the Israelis do? I mean, they run to shelters in the middle of the winter, so Israel is not going to do that. But at any rate, there might be, the Syrian regime definitely made a lot of progress over the last 2 years, and it's making yet more progress as we speak, probably. But the problem is, Syria is a bunch of destroyed cities. Syria is a ruin. You cannot make peace with a population that half of which is either displaced as internally displaced persons or as refugees outside of the country. You cannot make peace if the country is destroyed and its economic activities are halted. Syria requires, the estimates vary, but it could take $500 billion to rebuild Syria. Who's going to pay that? Who's going to pay for that? Everybody definitely. This is a collective effort. Going back to Russia, if Russia wants to have a peace deal in Syria, it needs to address two very, very, very important issues. Number one, the opposition. The opposition does not accept and will never accept Bashar al-Assad as president of Syria. He has to go. This is what they have contended since the beginning of the civil war in 2011. They continue to insist on that. Now, whether negotiations take place in Astana or Geneva or Sochi, whatever they take place, these are conditions that the opposition has put on these, and Russia has to take that into effect no matter what. The second thing that Russia has to also contend with is how can it really lead the peaceful resolution of the Syrian crisis according to what Bashar al-Assad wants, but yet at the same time require that everybody else help it in rebuilding Syria. In other words, you cannot expect to lead the whole process and get your man to succeed, get your man to win everything, and yet at the same time ask somebody else to pay for what the man destroyed. So it's a very complicated issue. The Russians are trying their best to see if they can find some sort of a solution. I don't think that the solution as proposed today, that everything would go back hunky-dory, we'll go back to the status quo ante, and Bashar al-Assad will remain in his presidential palace. I don't think that's really tenable anymore. It's not tenable. I think the Russians know it. They're probably trying to find some people among the Syrian opposition, whether it is the Moscow Forum or the Cairo Forum, the two groups of Syrian opposition figures who may be amenable to some sort of deal. They may find their people. They may find people to sign off on a peace deal that keeps Bashar al-Assad in power. I doubt that anybody else is going to go along with that. Thus, the peace deal will still be not possible. In other words, you can have Bashar al-Assad rule again, but yet at the same time, nobody is going to come to rebuild Syria. The refugees and the internally displaced people are not going back to go home to their homes, and the international community is going to continue to refuse to deal with Bashar al-Assad, no matter what Russia says. So this is at an impasse. Yes, it's an impasse, but yet at the same end, and Bashar al-Assad is definitely winning on the ground, but the politics are not going to reflect the winning on the ground situation.
It has been recently reported that the US will soon announce that it has far more troops on the ground in Syria than had been reported, almost 3 times as many, somewhere in the vicinity of 2,000 military personnel, as opposed to the 500 that had been admitted to up to now. Describe, if you can, what the Trump administration's objectives are in the Middle East today. Does President Trump have a plan, or is Jared Kushner the secret weapon employed on a seemingly never-ending round of Middle East shuttle diplomacy?
Well, as far as Jared Kushner is concerned, I don't think he deserves any answer. This is a person who is responsible for a million and one things, and he doesn't know the first thing about one of those million and one things. So I don't think that Jared Kushner is prepared or is equipped to get to anything that resembles success in Syria or elsewhere. As far as the administration is concerned, there is no plan for the Middle East. The administration is this is an administration that's built on a perfect ad hocery. I mean, they will issue a position, they will issue a declaration, an announcement, or something based on events. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they want to accomplish. Remember, we also have to remember that no matter how many people they have on the ground, the United States is not interested in any military action in Syria. It has used proxies, specifically the Syria Democratic Forces, mostly Kurds, but some Arabs as well, to try to defeat ISIS, and they have succeeded in supporting these people. Even these people are not good enough anymore for the United States, and the United States is pulling the rug from under the Kurds. They want to. The administration announced yesterday that, or rather, the president said yesterday that he told Turkish President Erdogan that he's going to be stopping his assistance to the Kurds. Even the Kurds are not good enough anymore. So the United States lost its cards long time ago in Syria, and Barack Obama was, as far as he was concerned, the Obama administration was smart enough not to get militarily involved in supposedly a quagmire that he called the Russians are getting into. But yet, at the same time, if their policy was not to be involved militarily, the same policy is still with the Trump administration, except the Trump administration does not know anything about Syria, does not know anything about where to go after the defeat of ISIS. It is likely that the United States will probably just simply let things go from one military victory for the Syrian regime to another, and not be able to influence anything on the ground. I think the United States has really definitely left itself out in the open without any policy towards Syria. It doesn't even have any policy towards anything else in the Middle East, let alone Syria. So I don't see this to be one of the strengths of the Trump administration, and I don't see them really getting around to formulating a good policy anytime soon.
Returning to another question from SIA intern Astrid Fikström, what do you believe to be the main security challenges in the region in the short and long term? How will foreign policy reflect this?
The main security challenge is not a security challenge in the Middle East. The security challenge in the Middle East is the admission that what needs to happen is the actual administration of democratic rule in the region. Democracy needs to prevail. Human rights need to be respected. The Palestinian cause, the Palestinian question has to be resolved with a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. I mean, you cannot have a military solution to everything. And the security challenge in the Middle East is specifically a challenge of development, a challenge of governance, and it's never a military challenge. And you can always fight. I mean, it's very, very easy to just start a war. The problem is in ending it. And generally speaking, wars usually breed their own security challenges by themselves. And that's exactly what has happened for a long, long time, and especially since 2003, the invasion of Iraq.
The ongoing Saudi-led economic and diplomatic blockade of Qatar, which has been in place since the middle of this year, does not look likely to end soon. Kuwaiti efforts at mediation have thus far failed. Is the blockading quartet of powers, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE and Bahrain, asking too much of Qatar? What do you think should be put on the table for this crisis to be resolved?
The blockading countries are asking too much of Qatar, and Qatar is not in the mood to do their bidding. In other words, they have counted from the very early days of the crisis that Qatar is not going to be able to withstand the pressure, and it's going to succumb and agree to whatever conditions they laid. And things turn out to be totally different. Qatar is still standing, and on the other hand, Qatar cannot stay like that forever. A political solution definitely needs to be found there. The problem is with this whole thing is the conditions for a Saudi, Emirati, Bahraini, Egyptian drawing from the brink, so to speak, pulling back from the brink. These conditions have not ripened yet. The problem is the conditions are not necessarily objective conditions. They are conditions that are in the personalities of the leaders of these states. In other words, specifically, the Saudi and Emirati leaderships are gun-ho on challenging Qatar for whatever Qatar does. And if you cannot really reform the personalities, if you cannot tell the personalities there is no need for all of this, then it's very, very hard to predict when this conflict can be resolved. The crisis is ongoing; it's stalemated. Qatar is not going to give in, and the blockading countries are not going to change their stand until something else happens. That something else, nobody knows what it is. But there are possibilities. First of all, the possibility of the rulers of these specifically two countries, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, would decide that the cost of continuing this, whether it is economic, political, popular, whatever it is, if they have to determine that this cost has become too high for them to accept. Definitely the issue of political and economic costs is really very, very important here. There are other factors. The factor of whether it is the United States, can the United States interfere? I mean, in a more forceful way than it has done so far. In other words, they have supported the Kuwaitis. They let the Kuwaitis lead the effort. They have supported the Kuwaitis. Secretary Tillerson went there twice, and he was rebuffed. The United States does not appear to have a unified policy on this issue. The White House is singing to a different tune than the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense. So when the United States has a unified position, maybe the United States can exert enough pressure for this conflict to be resolved. A third possibility, who knows? I mean, by the way, all it takes is just somebody firing one shot at somebody else, and then the whole region can go up in flames in a war. So if that happens, I think it will be definitely a calamity that nobody wants and nobody can really afford.
Yemen is becoming a protracted regional quagmire and a humanitarian disaster. With the Saudi-led coalition unable to bring this war to an end through military means alone, what, in your opinion, would be the necessary prerequisites to de-escalate this crisis? Or is this now a zero-sum game between the competing interests of Iran and Saudi Arabia?
It's strange to speak of prerequisites. Prerequisites mean condition. When we speak of conditions and prerequisites for this thing, we only have to think that Yemen is an independent country. In other words, Yemen can have its own leaders decide for itself what kind of leadership it wants to have, what kind of policies, what kind of system it wants to have. Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners are not the ones to decide how Yemen can really resolve its issues. What is pressing now are specifically two very, very important matters. Number one, the humanitarian situation. You cannot continue with a war when there are millions of people are threatened for their livelihood. They're dying of cholera, and they're dying of very, very really preventable diseases. I mean, it's a humanitarian disaster that no country needs. The other situation is that the Saudi-led coalition is not making any military gain. In other words, where they started, yes, they made some gains in the south. They recovered the southern part of the country, but yet the forces that are fighting them today are still standing. As a matter of fact, they just launched a missile against Riyadh, so they're still there. So the military solution is not going to be the solution that needs to be implemented. It's a political solution. That is a United Nations-led effort to try to find a political solution, and that political solution will depend both on the cooperation of Yemenis amongst themselves and the cooperation of the surrounding countries. And without that political solution, the Yemen quagmire will remain to be a quagmire. The Saudis will remain to pay heavy prices for their involvement there. Incidentally, Saudi Arabia, according to estimates, pays about $700 million a month for its operations in Yemen. How long can Saudi Arabia maintain this? This is crazy. When Saudi Arabia is really tightening belts and telling people they can't have this or that subsidy, raising prices for oil or anything like that within the kingdom anyway. And this is a drain on the Saudi treasury. a drain on their reputation, a drain on their legitimacy and credibility in the international community. So, it's time they just let the Yemenis decide for themselves what kind of a system and how they're going to be governed or governing themselves.
Astrid asks, in terms of the development and differentiation of the Arab economies with an eye to the longer-term progression and lessening of dependency on oil to fuel growth, what do you see are potential conflicts that might arise from this? Are there interests that are happy about this potential development influencing their agenda to try and prevent investment and development of alternative energy sources?
There always is room for a diversified economy. In other words, the oil-rich countries need definitely to diversify their economies, and they know that they need to diversify their economies. And the problem with that is you want to diversify the economy, you have to have a different economic system. In other words, you want to allow for the development of an independent economic sector from that of the state. Well, by the way, this is not only limited to the oil-rich countries. It can be applied to the other countries in the region, where basically rent relations prevail. So, but the problem is when you want to step away from this, you want to allow for the establishment of a private sector, because only the private sector will be able to pick up the slack from any government retrenchment, any slow economic growth or anything like that. You want to have a private sector that employs people, especially people who are with college degrees and stuff like that. I mean, only Saudi Arabia, for instance, is like anywhere between 150 to 200,000 people graduate every year from school looking for work. I mean, how are they going to find jobs for all these people? And Egypt has probably more than that, definitely has more than that. So where are these people going to find employment if not for the development of a private sector? The problem with the private sector is you develop a private sector, you have to allow for the private sector to truly develop as a private sector. In other words, you have to allow for investment that's unhindered, unfettered by regulations, by the bureaucracy, by the higher-ups, by the rulers, any people like that. And that investment can be domestic, can be international. Domestic investment may be there, but the only domestic investment is the state domestic investment, because the state is the one that makes most of the money in the country. Now, if it's international investment, the international investors are not going to come into an economy that doesn't necessarily have laws protecting for an investment. If you want to confiscate people's assets, like what's happening today in Saudi Arabia, that scares off international investors. So it's a very, very complicated kind of thing, but yet at the same time it is very, very possible. But if it is possible, the only possibility from it happening is the development of a different private sector, the development of freedoms for that private sector to operate. And this is where we get into the political aspect of reform. And can a country like Saudi Arabia reform its economy without necessarily reforming its politics and allowing people the freedoms that they don't allow them today? So these are big questions. As far as these countries being able to develop alternative energy sources, yes, they are interested in developing alternative energy sources. And there has been a lot of achievement in this field. So far, however, things are working, but so far, however, this has not become a dominant factor. It's still, the fossil fuel economy is still the driving force.
Finally, Imad, as 2017 draws to a close, what are your thoughts on the pressing regional issues for the first part of 2018?
That's a big question. This calls for prediction, but based on how things are going today, this is something that you can put in the position of maybe answering a question on the Palestine question, on the issue of Israeli-Palestinian relations. We didn't get too much into that, but I don't see 2018 starting any different than the way 2017 finishes. In other words, the challenges that are faced today by the region are going to be there into 2018 and 2019 and far ahead of that. It's going to be, now that ISIS supposedly has been defeated in Syria and Iraq, it is rearing its ugly head elsewhere, like what happened yesterday in Egypt. So that is going to remain a pressing question, a pressing issue. How do you prevent organizations like ISIS from morphing into different kinds of organizations or recruiting yet more people or stuff like that? But the only way to do that is to decide that we need to develop that region. That region needs major economic and political development. If that is not addressed, nothing in 2018, 2019, or any other year after that is going to be any better than what we are experiencing today. You could expend as much money as you want on the blunt instrument of the military, a blunt instrument of military security, so to speak. But if you do not develop the place, if you do not take in all those young people who every year look for work and don't find it, you never have peace. It's the region is going to continue to have its problems if its economic and social conditions are not changed.
Thanks very much, Imad. That's a wrap for today. Great having you back on board for the 40th episode of Strategikon.
Congratulations.
Thanks very much.
Very nice. Oh, wow. Lovely.
This is Strategikon. I'm John Bruni, and that's the show for now. You can subscribe and download Strategikon through iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube, as well as from sageinternational.org.au. If you want to know more about Sage International Australia, check out our pages on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and our website sageinternational.org.au. Until next time, goodbye.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.